Chip, I'm just wondering what some of your constituents and members are saying about how tough this year is and when they think an end in sight may be.
Well, it is very, very tough, no question about it. It'll go down on record as the worst year ever. But people have understood that really since this started back in March. When we look ahead to when we believe that the rebound begins or the slow crawl out of this begins, we're really looking at the spring. And that's assuming, of course, the vaccines are beginning to be distributed widely across the U.S. and the globe, that therapeutics continue to improve, and that we have good, safe, reliable, and inexpensive testing. If you put all those three things together, April might be a month we start to come out of this, but the next 4 months are going to be brutal.
And that sounds really exciting, but the problem is a lot of people can't make it until April. How many people are saying that if without help, April doesn't even exist for them?
Yeah, that's the most alarming statistic we have received from our membership across the board, and that is that about 70%, 7 out of 10 hotels say they can't make it more than 6 months if there's no help at all. Keep in mind that CARES package that was originally signed by President Trump back on March the 27th was expected to last only 8 to 10 weeks. It's even written into the legislation, 8 to 10 weeks. That was gone a long time ago. And the idea that they haven't done anything since then, it's really frustrating to a lot of people. They seem a little bit more concerned with their own reelection than the jobs of the people they represent.
Chip, frustrating is putting it mildly, according to the conversations that Taylor and I have been having throughout this. So appreciate the neutral word and the candor. But moving forward, just from an industry perspective, can you talk to us about how your industry is planning for the second half of next year? Because as you know, so many of these conferences and various conferences in cities like Las Vegas, for example, are planned 6 to 9 months, even a couple of years out in the future. Are you starting to see a rebound in the second half of next year?
We've begun to see planning on those events, for third and fourth quarter. But what you point out is so critically important. We've got to have business travel come back. Leisure travel has been the only type of travel that has sustained us at all, and that really hasn't been what we needed. And it's great. But the reality is that about 60 to 65% of an average hotel's revenue comes from some sort of business travel. Our studies show that only 8% of people have taken a business trip since March, and strangely enough, only 8% plan to take a business trip during the first half of next year. So that's the real problem, is that business travel is not happening.
I want to bring you some breaking news and just interrupt this conversation. We are hearing from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who's speaking in an interview here with us at Bloomberg News, saying that he does have an excellent relationship with Fed's Jerome Powell and defending sort of the record of close coordination that they've had with the Federal Reserve during this crisis. This, of course, Chip, as we continue to talk about stimulus that is still needed and more coordination from Washington to get us through the next 6 months. As you just alluded to, what specifically would you like to see? Earlier, we were having conversations that a PPP loan isn't enough. I mean, we're all full of debt. We need grants and loan forgiveness. Have any of your members floated that idea around?
It's really interesting that you just mentioned Secretary Mnuchin, because if you recall, once the CARES Act was passed, I can still vividly remember him standing up and saying that the PPP was good, but what was going to be great was the Main Street Lending Act, because they could really use that money and leverage it into trillions of dollars into the economy. Well, if he were to be given a report card on the Main Street Lending Act, it would be an absolute F, because it hasn't worked at all. Yeah. I don't know of a single hotel anywhere that has received a Main Street Lending Act loan. And you're exactly right. PPP is good, but it's only meant for the very short term to get you through a gap. For so many of our real estate asset-heavy hoteliers, which is just about all of them, I mean, they've got to pay their mortgages. They've got to be able to service their debt.
I want to follow up on this, because this has been the common thread from the Fed to the Treasury Department over the last week, that Secretary Mnuchin has asked for $426 billion to be returned back and put in a Treasury Department fund that would need congressional approval for whomever takes over after he leaves office. In this case, likely going to be soon to be confirmed Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. And that sets up a significant fight. My question to you, Chip Rogers, could your industry benefit from some of that $426 billion in those lending facility programs right now?
Absolutely. We've been begging for it for months. But the rules were set up so that anybody who has an asset-based business really can't gain any access to the Main Street lending program. You see the numbers. He got $500 billion, and now he's returning about 85% of it. And it almost makes no sense because the theory was that some of these loans may be bad. That's why they're not lending them out. Well, now he's asking that the money just be given out through a grant process. So it really doesn't make any sense. And yes, that money could be used to save thousands of jobs right now today.